You are about to enter the Shockwaves Skullsessions podcast on ShockwaveSkullsessions.com. And now your host, Bob Nalbandian.
Welcome to another episode of the Shockwaves Skullsessions podcast. Just so you know, this is an audio-only podcast. We didn't shoot video for this one for various reasons, but nonetheless, this is a fantastic episode. We got returning guests, Monte Conner and David Tedds, together once again on this episode, along with guitarist Marc Bonilla. A lot of you might be familiar with him. He's released several great solo records and has played with a slew of top-rated musicians from Keith Emerson to Glenn Hughes to you name it, man. A fantastic addition. Thank you, Mr. David Tedds, for adding Marc Bonilla. And our main guest is legendary, and I do mean legendary, 10 years after drummer, original member of the band, still performing today under the 10 years after moniker, of course, drummer Ric Lee. A fantastic episode, and we couldn't have picked a better cast for this. Monte, David, and Marc are huge 10 years after fans, and believe it or not, 10 years after were one of the first heavy rock bands I was actually familiar with when I was 8 or 9 years old. You know, back in the early 70s, a lot of people don't recall how big 10 years after were, and Humble Pie, and of course Alice Cooper. They were right up there with Sabbath, Zeppelin, and Deep Purple. And a lot of people forget that. I mean, 10 years after were right up there with the Rolling Stones in the late 60s, early 70s. Of course, they did the classic performance at Woodstock in 1969, which was without a question one of the most energetic performances of that festival. You could check them out doing the song I'm Going Home. Anyway, fantastic conversation. We go through the entire 10 years after catalog up through 1974, and then we touch on, of course, their great new album entitled A Sting in the Tail. Actually, it's not a new album. It was released in 2017, but the deluxe edition was just released, and you could pick it up at the band's website as well as Amazon.com, and you can pick up Ric Lee's new book on Amazon.com and his website. He gives you all the information toward the end of the podcast. Also, before we get into this, I want to let you know my microphone got cut off toward the last 20 minutes or so of this interview. So you won't be hearing me at the end, which is probably a good thing. But anyway, it got a little confusing because they were without a moderator, and I pretty much just played moderator on this role here. Anyway, without further ado, man, let's get into it. This is Ric Lee along with Monte Conner, David Tedds, and Marc Bonilla going through the 10 years after catalog. Enjoy. Well, let's go ahead and begin Shockwaves Skullsessions podcast. We got a great cast. This is an audio podcast, so I'll introduce everyone so you could at least be able to recognize their voices here. We got the great Ric Lee, original and current drummer for 10 years after, 50 years. Man, how you doing there, Ric? Over 50 years.
Very good, thank you. Yeah, I'm still surviving, thank God.
And our cast include the returning Monte Conner, of course, VP of Nuclear Blast Records. What's going on, Monte Conner?
How you doing, Bob? Thrilled to be here. Biggest 10 years after fan in the world. Bigger than Marc and bigger than David Tedds. Let me just say that right now.
Well,
that's only because I lost 40 pounds.
And Ric, you and I met briefly when you played Heroes of Woodstock in New York. I think it was 2010 or 12, somewhere around there. And then
yeah.
And then I saw you when you played Iridium a few years back when Joe Gooch was in the band. So I think that's the last time we saw each other.
That's a great club. I love playing there. It's
yeah, fantastic.
It's disappeared because of COVID, which is a big.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware. Is Iridium closed now for good?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I believe. Yeah.
Awful.
Bummer.
That's what I heard.
And we got David Tedds, also returning guest. What's up, Mr. Tedds?
How are you? I can beat Monte in my little thing here. Ric, we have met before too. I did the liner notes for the 2013 reissues of Recorded Live and Positive Vibrations, and I emailed you numerous times. But back about 12, 13 years ago, my wife and I rented one of your B&Bs in Tideswell.
Oh, one of the holiday cottages, yeah?
Yeah, and me, my wife, and Graham Oliver came over to your house and had some nibbles and tea and stuff.
Oh, yeah, well, we're that kind of people, you know.
Would that be Graham Oliver from Saxon?
Yeah.
That would be correct.
Wow.
Yep. I know all the important people.
Apparently you do. That's why we all look up to you, Mr. Teds.
Yeah, well,
no, you look up to me because I'm 6'5".
That too. All right, and our fourth guest, a new guest here to the Skull Sessions. You probably know of this guy as well, Marc Bonilla, guitarist extraordinaire. I know you've released several solo records, and you did some stuff with Keith Emerson as well. Why don't you talk about what you're up to these days, Mark, before we get started?
Well, we're actually doing a tribute concert that we did for Keith 5 years ago. Is finally getting released here in a couple of weeks, and there's quite an all-star cast of characters from the prog world, actually. And so I'm in the process of promoting that, getting that out and all of that. So that's been my mainstay here. Yeah, and Keith and I, the last, I think, 20 years of his career, we were musical allies, and we got to do a lot of stuff. I heard lots of, he actually told me a great story, Rick, about him and Alvin. I guess they were either drinking or dropping acid in France, and they both decided to swim the English Channel back. And so I think they got about maybe, 50 strokes in and decided that wasn't the best idea, and they came back.
Yeah, I think it was cocaine they were doing at the time.
Was it cocaine? Well, that would make more sense. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. I got a nice visual with that, with the I'm Going Home title. But anyway, so yeah.
Interesting thing about Keith as well, that my first wife was a ballet dancer, a dancer, modern and ballet. And Keith was the rehearsal pianist for her when they were in the early teens.
Wow.
And in Worthing on the south coast of England. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. I had no idea. We do have when we were putting together the DVD, we had a bunch of we had some good resource from his mom, because she kept everything,
Yeah.
And
Mom did that
up
too.
in Sussex. Yeah. And so all these, they're sending me all these great pictures of Keith, when he was that age. And there's some that, he's got the bow, like the bowler tie on, and with this slick back hair and the pomp, and it was like, this is great. So that's probably about the time, right? That he was doing.
Yeah.
It was great.
It was interesting because when we played together, I think we played at the Marquee Club. Was the first time I met Keith.
Yeah.
And of course she said, "Oh my God, it's Keith Emerson. I know him. I've known him since I was a kid." And so that was it. They were off and running,
Yeah. That's cool. That's very cool. So so that's what I'm doing, and so on we go.
All right, man, you got a great radio voice there, Mark. You should be hosting this.
I do a lot of voiceover shit, so that's everybody keeps telling me. So,
Mark, you used to work at Capitol Records, right?
Me?
Yeah,
No,
I recognize. I thought you worked in the music business.
Records, and I've actually bought some Capitol Records, but
okay, yeah. For some reason, I thought you worked in the music business at some point.
Oh, I would have periods of blackouts where I would read about murders in the newspaper, then find out that I had, in fact, a paycheck from Capitol Records. So it could have been during that time. It's a dark time to talk about.
Is your normal voice up there, Mark?
Yes, it is. It's very pleasant.
All right. Well, how about we get started on this? Let's, begin. I'm going to more or less be moderator to let you guys do all the talking on this podcast. So let's start with the beginning. The debut record of 10 years after, 1967. And why don't you kind of talk about the formation of the band, which led up to this record, and how all that began, Rick?
You've got to read the book for that, Bob.
There you go.
No, seriously. I joined Alvin and Leo when they were a band called the Jaybirds. They billed themselves as the biggest sounding trio in the country, in England, that was. And I did an audition with them. Their original drummer, a guy called Dave Quickmeyer, was my teacher and mentor. And he schooled me up to do the job that he wanted to leave. I got the audition, or I won the audition, based on the fact that I could play the bass drum rhythm to Sweet Little 16 that David taught me. the Chuck Berry song, which actually wasn't what was played on the record, but it was the way they did it. And when I did the audition, Alvin turned to me and said, "Hey, that's great, man." He said, "You're the first drummer that we've met that can play that rhythm. Would you like to join the band?" So I said, "Well, give me a couple of days. I'll have a think about it." And I was with a band called the Mansfields at the time, which is where I came from in Nottinghamshire. And we were earning really good money in those days. We were out 7 nights a week, and we were getting £15 a week, which I guess was probably about $12 or something. But that was good money in those days. Yeah. And as soon as I joined Alvin and Leo, I went down to £15 a month because I didn't know, but they weren't hardly working. So anyway, I hung in there. Chick Churchill joined us. Alvin decided we need some keyboards because at the time Spencer Davis was a happening band. And, of course, they had the Hammond organ with Stevie Winwood and the whole thing. So Alvin decided we needed to add keyboards. So Chick joined us, but we then went off to do a show at a theatre in London. But Chick hadn't been at the audition for that, so he wasn't able to do that with us. So he waited patiently for us back in Nottingham. And it was supposed to run for 2 years. It ran for 6 weeks. So we were then out of work again. And then we managed to get a gig with 3 singers called the Ivy League. We became their backing band. And that way we got Chick more into the band. He was hired as road manager to start with, and then we gradually snuck him in on keyboards on the shows we were doing with them. That folded after about 18 months. Alvin was keen to go back to Nottingham, and I said, "Well, no, this is crazy. I'm not going to do that. We're in London. You know, this is where it happens. Nobody's going to come and see us up in the north. Even the Beatles had to come to London to make it, you know." So anyway, we hung in there, and we got an audition at the Marquee Club, which was the happening blues club in London at that time. People like Alexis Corner was playing there. I call Alexis the granddaddy of the blues. John Mayall was the daddy of the blues. And all of those things were starting to happen all around London and in the centre of London as well. There were 2 clubs, basically. There was the Marquee Club and the Flamingo Club. At the Flamingo was Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames and John Mayall. And at the Marquee, it was Alexis Corner. And Alexis Corner's support band, he hired them, were the Rolling Stones. And the Rolling Stones actually got more popular than Alexis, so he ended up firing them because they were more popular than him. But he did actually take a lot of interest in their later development. And I know he and Brian Jones were really good friends. So,
sorry to interrupt. Did you see these shows, Rick?
No, I didn't see Alexis. No, not then. I'd seen Alexis, funnily enough, at a jazz festival in Manchester many years before, and the guy that played drums with him at that point was Ginger Baker, and I didn't realise it was Ginger Baker because I was much younger. You know, Alexis was a good bit older than the rest of us, but you know, they were kind of doing modern jazz and blues. Anyway. Moving on to the Marquee. So we passed the audition at the Marquee Club, and then we did the Windsor Blues and Jazz Festival, which was run by the Marquee organisation in the summertime. And Mike Vernon, who was a staff producer at Decca Records, saw us and got us signed to Decca. Although actually a few weeks before that, we'd auditioned for Decca and for the BBC, and we'd failed both of them. So we got lucky with Mr. Vernon signing us to the label, and he did the first 3 albums with us. And then luckily Bill Graham heard the first album, which was released on London Records in the States, but it more or less escaped. Actually, it wasn't really released, but somehow Bill heard it, and Bill was the promoter at Fillmore West at that time, and he asked us if we were ever in America, as if we would be, would we play at the venue? And Chris Wright, our manager, then started frantically trying to find the money to get us to America, which he did. And we came in '67 for an eight-date tour out of 8 weeks. We were there for 8 weeks. We did 8 dates, one of which was Fillmore West. And then Bill was just opening Fillmore East, and he asked us to stop off in New York on the way home and play there, which we did. And then Frank Barcelona, who became our agent, saw us at the film. No, he saw us actually at the Scene Club in New York. We played the Scene Club as well. And Steve Paul Scene Club, right. And Frank said he wanted to be our agent, and then he was our agent. And after that, through very clever packaging, he helped us to build up to what we became. So that's a potted history of the beginning.
All right. Well, let's get into the debut record, David Ted's. Talk about the self-titled debut, 1967. Your thoughts on that record?
Well, I was going to ask Rick that, it's a Mike Vernon production, and, Mike was producing, Savoy Brown, Fleetwood Mac, and all the British blues bands at the time. Correct, Rick?
Yeah, I think Fleetwood Mac was probably a little bit later, because it was Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green, of course.
Yeah.
But he was producing John Mayall, that's for sure. Yeah. And I think Savoy Brown as well. I think you're right on that.
Those albums in his production style, they're really dry.
Oh, yeah. Very clean. What I call a clean recording.
Why is that?
Well, very clean. You say dry, it's just very clean.
Yeah.
There's no rawness about it.
Yeah. So, and there's some Alvin compositions on there, but it's also a lot of blues covers, correct?
Yeah, we found an album called, I can't remember what it's called, but it had the track by Al Cooper, I Can't Keep From Crying Sometimes, was on it. The track that Paul Jones wrote under a pseudonym of McLeod. Paul Jones was singing with Manfred Mann at the time. What was that? I forgot what that one was called. It's the first opening track.
I want to know.
Yeah, I Want to Know. That's right. So that's right. Help Me Baby, of course, Sonny Boy Williamson, which we'd been doing back in Nottingham when I first joined the band. So we'd been doing that. Well, in fact, they'd been doing it before that even, Alvin and Leo. So that song was about sort of 10 years old by the band by the time we got to record it on the first album. So you're right. Yeah, absolutely. And Alvin's first songs really were like John Lee Hooker ripoffs and things like that.
Yeah, Love Until I Die is basically Crossroads with different lyrics, isn't it?
Correct. You spotted it.
It didn't take much investigation the first time I heard it. I went, hey, wait a second, I know this song. And then the vocals came in and I went, no, I don't know this song.
All right. Monte, what are your thoughts on the debut?
Well, I mean, obviously the first three records, and I'm always confused about whether to include Shush in the first three, because that record was like kind of a transition.
Really?
That was a transitional record into like when the band was doing more of a rock sound. So I grouped the first three records together with the dry Mike Vernon productions, and I just love all three of those records. I'm obsessed with the UK blues boom. If I could get in a time machine and go anywhere in the world, it would be basically to go back to those days that you were describing, Rick, seeing those bands in clubs in the UK in like 66, 67. To be like 15 years old or 14 years old in London at that time is like my dream. So I just put that record on, and, even though it's a little bit more primitive compared to when the band would spread their wings on Stonehenge, for example, it's just magical to me. It just takes me back to those times. It's hard not to just fall in love with that debut record.
It was a very, very exciting time for the blues, and in fact, I must mention Chris Barber. Chris Barber was a trombone player, had his own band, the Chris Barber Band, and they had a #1 record in the UK and America with Petit Fleur, which was actually played on clarinet by Monte Sunshine. And when Barber Band came to America because of their popularity, Chris spent a lot of time in Chicago at the blues clubs where all the guys were playing. I think he saw Muddy Waters there, Sonny Boy, Brunsey, I think, had gone by then. But Chris said to his manager, Harold Pendleton, who was the man who ended up owning the Marquee Club and running it, and he said, we've got to get these guys to England. They're amazing. And so they brought these people over to England on tours. And one of the stopping off places on the tours was Nottingham. And there was a ballroom there called the Dancing Slipper, which is in fact where I did my audition with Alvin and Leo. And Alvin's parents, Sam and Doris, used to go to the Dancing Slipper to see that they were big blues fans. They had lots and lots of blues records. And they saw Brunsey there one night, and they invited him back home to their home for a drink, and he agreed to go. Wow. And they took him to their house, and Alvin was supposed to be in bed, of course, because he was only a youngster. I think he was about 11 or 12. and they dragged him out of bed, and the blues man sat there on the carpet, drinking his whiskey and playing blues tunes on his guitar, and that was it. Alvin was sold on it,
Yeah.
All of this, I say, is in the book. So, if you want the expanded versions, please go get it. But yeah, so there's all of that went around what we did on the first albums. It was an incredible sort of education for me as well, because Alvin and Leo taught me a heck of a lot. When I first joined the band, they were doing Ray Charles numbers. I Got a Woman. They did Bo Diddley. Bo Diddley was a 10-minute guitar solo in those days for Alvin. I didn't know any of that stuff. I had to pick it up like at a drop of a hat. They'd turn around and say, "Oh, we're doing so-and-so tonight. You'll pick it up." And that was it, So.
But Rick, did you kind of have your, a lot of times it's kind of like I find out and stuff that I use applied ignorance to my playing, where I may not know style, but the fact is that my unfamiliarity will bring it something that, you don't usually have. Do you find in your drumming for that stuff, because it wasn't like authentic stuff, because you weren't used to it, that you brought your own thing to that and made it your own?
Well, I was very much into the jazz drummers prior to that, like people like Art Blakey, Buddy Rich, of course, Gene Kruger to an extent, Joe Morello a little bit, And so I used to try and play. My bass drum technique was never as good as those jazz guys. I didn't have like the independence they had at that time, but I had begun to develop the independence with the left hand, doing little fills in between the beats. And later on, I converted that to if you were doing ding 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 ding. But then I found out that would fit into a straight 8 rhythm, that your rock rhythm, So you go.
Yeah, because I would notice a lot of the jazz stuff in the TYA stuff. There was definitely, it's kind of like when Mitch would bring stuff to Hendrix. You could hear that undertone that made it. You normally wouldn't have thought that a jazz drummer with Hendrix would have worked, but it did. It worked in this way that it was unique, and that's what I think your style did too. Is the fact that you brought. It sounded like jazz overtones. That's why I had asked, because you could definitely hear that. John Densmore in the Doors too had a lot of jazz to his stuff, and he brought that, especially that cymbal stuff. All that ride stuff. That's jazz right there. But you gave it a different complexion because of that's what made it stand out.
We got compared quite a lot, John and me.
Did you?
I've met him. I'd love to meet him. We never sort of met for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But people have said, "Hey, you and John Densmore are very, very similar."
Yeah, that's what was great about it, because it with those beds, those grooves and those beds there, that's what everybody else kind of builds on top of, and that's what was great about your style. So that's very cool.
But just on the triplet thing, while we're at it, is we played a club in Covent Garden in London. This is before Zeppelin were formed, and we were playing there, and I was packing my kit up at the end of the night, because we didn't have crew in those days, and we got a bit of a name around London at that point, but nothing fantastic. And these two Brummy guys came up. One had a sort of a poodle haircut, and the other was a very stocky guy. And then they came up, and the stocky guy said to me, he said, "I hope them triplet things I'm doing with your left hand, what is that?" So I showed him. And he said, "Oh, thanks, mate. I appreciate that." And that was Bonham. And the other guy was Robert Plant.
See, there you go. See,
that's great.
Somebody has taken me up on that and said, "That's bullshit. You didn't teach Bonham the triplet thing. It was Carmine Appici." Well, Bonham took those triplets and converted them and played them on the bass drum, which I never. He played them on the bass. And Carmine, of course, did as well. But the point about that is that Bonham and Plant Zeppelin weren't formed at that point. They were in Robert Plant's Band of Joy. So I know that I was the first man to show him the triplet idea. What they did with it was fantastic.
See, those are the things. I hope that's in your book.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because that's credit where credit's due. It was. I was talking to Ron Bushy from Iron Butterfly. Right, we're friends, and Ron apparently was the first guy to cut a hole in the bass drum. for the mic.
I didn't know.
No one else had done it up to that point. He said, you know what, I'm going to cut a hole in here and put there. And also what he used to do, and I didn't know this either, was that the sound that he got on his drums on Inagata Vita, he put rubber cement around the rims of his toms. So it muted the toms. It gave it this wooden kind of feel, but it didn't, it was kind of like having a ring around there, but he figured out ways to do things. And then, of course, people took his idea and went from there. But yeah, those are the things that you figure out who actually pioneered those things. And that's who should be getting the credit for those things. Not the guys that all of a sudden it became famous for them later on, like Eddie Van Halen tapping. Shit, that thing was a long time before Eddie ever got a hold of it. Not to take anything away from it, but it's those types of things like what you were talking about, that need to be brought out there in the forefront. So
the other thing I was going to say, if I may, is just there's a song called "The Stomp." I'm not sure which album it's on. I think it's on it's either on Stonehenge or on Cricklewood Green.
Yeah, but no. It's on Shush.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Well, good. Well done.
Thank you very much. That'll be 10 quid.
You don't want to go head to head with Ted's, I can tell you that right now.
But on the Stomp, Alvin brought it, and it was basically a straight ahead shuffler, And I thought, what the hell can I do with this to not play the same damn shuffle again?
Right. Yeah.
So if you listen to it carefully, I reversed it. I did, in a sense, what Ginger had done on Sunshine of Your Love, where he plays actually on the on-beat.
Yeah.
Ginger plays the rip back to front. Yeah. And that's what I did with the Stomp as well. And I hadn't heard Sunshine at that time, or if I hadn't taken it on board. That's for the way he played it. And so I switched it. And so you've got the offbeat is on the onbeat.
Wow.
And bass is on 2 and 4.
Yeah. See,
which I'm doubt I can play that now.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on. We're already a half hour in, and we only talked about the debut so far. So we'll try to rush this along. So we're going to combine the two albums, Stonehenge and Shush, which both came out in 1969. And we got to also touch on the Woodstock performance, because I remember as a kid watching that on TV. A very young kid.
Woodstock?
You never heard of that?
What was this? It must have slipped by me. I don't know about
the best performance. I remember as a kid just being blown away by that performance of "I'm Going Home," and we'll touch on that as well. But let's go ahead and combine the Stonehenge and Shush. I don't know why I can't say that. Shush. 1969. Again, both albums recorded in the same year. A lot of bands, back then, they recorded 2 albums a year. So talk a little bit about that, Rick.
Well, that's right. I mean, the contracts in those days, they wanted you to do 2 albums a year. It was as simple as that. That's what you had to deliver. We weren't really a singles band either. I mean, we were lucky that Chris Wright managed to get us a deal with Decca that wasn't tied to singles. Because what they did in those days, you'd record like 3-4 tracks. They'd put one of them out as a single. And if it didn't happen, then they'd drop the contract. But then actually, tell a lie, they used to get you to do more tracks, so that they could stockpile, so that if you then went to another company and were successful, they had the back catalogue to put out. But Shush actually, the reason it's called that, it was originally, that was going to be that album, and the next album was going to be It. So it was Shit.
Oh, wow. I never knew that. Is that in the book too?
I got to get this book.
Somehow or other, we did. The next one became What? I think somebody lost their bottle on the.
You said it was going to be shit, and they went, "What?"
Yeah,
no, I've got
that's an amazing. I never heard that until just now. That's an amazing story.
So I think Shush was the one that they had the studio version of Good Morning Little Schoolgirl on it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did with that, because it was, we tried desperately in the studio. It was always very hard to get the liveness of the band, because everything was either deadened down or one thing. I mean, engineers used to want me to put tape on the cymbals and tape on the drums, and I was like what I called a straight through no silencer kit. Where the drums would just have their natural resonance. But in that period, there was a lot of tape stuck on everything. So we had difficulty in making Good Morning Little Schoolgirl sound the way it did on stage. And also, we had the guitar-bass battle in the middle. And so the way we got around that was the drum kit was actually, it was in Morgan Studios in Cricklewood. And I was in a corner of the studio with screens either side, and just really the bass drum poking out at the front with the mic inside it. And so we recorded it, and Alvin and Leo standing in front of me as they did on stage, but the amps were in separate sort of booed off areas to cut down the spill. But they did it as if it was a stage performance in the studio, and to a degree, I think that made it work. We and the end of it was always a bit strange when you listen to it, because I used to play across the beat in the outro, so I wouldn't be hitting the 2 and 4 straight on. I would be going across the beat and then coming back again. Sometimes I didn't get back.
Well, didn't you finish with a bunch of triplets? I think you were doing triplets on the snare drum at the end of that. Yeah, which was very cool. You weren't expecting that. All of a sudden, man, it was like being hit with a submachine gun. It was great.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to have to dig that out again. Then,
yeah, no, because you went, yeah, you like tripleted the whole thing, which was like not what you would expect, and it was just like, that's great. Yeah, I remember that. It was very cool.
And the nice thing about it was with the kit when I recorded, I was big friends with Clive Bunker in those days from Jeff.
Yeah.
And he had a flat in Kentish Town, and I lived up the road in Stoke Newington, which is about a 10-minute drive. Mm-hmm. And I drove down there one day. I just got he just bought our album, whichever one it was. I can't remember exactly. Oh, sorry, I'm getting this wrong. No, I'd got a copy of the album, and I was so excited. I thought, I've got to take this and play it at the Bunker. And when I got there, he was listening to Stay by the Hollies, which has got amazing drumming on it by Bobby Elliott. He was our hero, both of us. So I walked in and he said, "Oh, what you got?" I said, "Oh, it's the new album." He said, "Oh, put it on, put it on." I said, "Well, no, you listen to it, when you got to." No, I want to hear it, put it on. He said, he turned to me after the first track. He said, "You bastard." I said, "What?" He said, "You've done it again." I said, "What have I done?" He said, "That tom sound. How do you get that? How do you do that?" I just tune them and hit them,
Well, David Tedds, your take on both the Stonehenge and Shush.
Go on, say shush again. Go on.
Shush.
Shush. One of the things that occurred to me was that Stonehenge comes out a full year after the first album. In between those, you've got Undead, the live album, but the second studio album comes out a full year after the first one, which, as you were saying, per the contracts at the time, was a hell of a long time. Was there a reason for that?
I only because of Decca's schedules. What was I thinking? Yeah, when the first album came out, they kind of cocked that up because we were from the north of England. They figured we were better known up there, so they put the majority of the stuff into shops in the north of England. But in fact, we weren't hardly known in the north of England. We were better known in London because of the Marquee and all of that stuff, and all the venues around there we used to play. So when it started to sell and they needed to repress, they went back to repress, but it was on the run to Christmas. And they'd got Tom Jones and Engelbert Humperdinck were taking up the pressing plants, so they couldn't get another 10 years after run done. So we lost out on sales with that because of this amazing sort of, what would you call it, logistical approach that they had.
And then Stonehenge has the little solo songs in between the main compositions.
Yeah, Faro and Scoobly Doobly Doobob and those.
Yeah,
they had like 4 of them.
Well, Scoobly Doobly Doobob came from, it was what Alvin used to do on stage as the lead into I Can't Keep From Crying Sometime.
Oh.
And it's just his little, he originally called it Scat Thing.
Which is on the live album.
And we used to leave the stage and leave him to that and then come back for I Can't Keep From Crying.
And you did three blind mice.
Yeah, well, I was, well, they got the idea for that when we first went to the States. One of the promotion guys took us around one of the warehouses and said, pick out any albums you fancy, And I found an Art Blakey album, which ironically was called Three Blind Mice. And I didn't know what the hell I was going to play because I didn't play any other instruments, so I couldn't play like a guitar or bass or whatever or keys. And so I figured out, the only thing I can do. And it just so happened that when I played the kit, the tuning as such was right with bam, 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 ba-dum, ba-dum. You know, it worked. And then I had the idea, because I was actually, I call myself an outpatient. I was an outpatient at the Guildhall School of Music, which is an external student, basically. And I was going there to learn tune percussion. And I was learning timpani. And I said to Mike, I want to put timpani on this. And so that's what we did at the end of it. We put the timpani and then the footsteps of the farmer's wife running to cut off the tail with a carving knife. Yeah,
kind of like the the beginning to the Umaguma, you know, with the fly being swatted, you know, after Francesca Meadows. Yeah.
So to touch on Shush really quickly, the production on that was noticeably better than what had preceded it.
I think that was the first album with Andy Johns, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was. But
and Andy was a terror for that. I used to have to fight him, you know, tape everywhere.
I think most artists used to have to fight Andy Johns for something, didn't they?
Literally.
He did some good stuff later on, but that was definitely one of his traits. And also, if I remember rightly, Morgan Studios, which is where we did it, was also a much... Yeah. There were no hard surfaces in there, as I recall, you know, which give you the brightness that you can get. Later, that became a key point with a lot of studios, that they would have a drum area that was hard floors and hard screens, so you kept the ambience, you know. But that wasn't the case in Morgan in those days.
Did you ever play with traditional grip, or did you always use match grip? What, you know, with being a jazz fan?
Funny enough, not. I started out as traditional, as match grip all the time. But many years later, I developed a problem with my elbow, which is called golf elbow. It's not tennis elbow is the underneath of the elbow when you get pain from hitting tennis balls, basically.
Right.
Absorption. I had what was called golf elbow, and I went to see a physiotherapist, and he said, "Is there any other way you can hold your stick?" So I said, "Well, yeah, there's a traditional grip." He said, and I showed him, and he said, "Oh, that'd be great," because he said that'll put the pressure on the other muscle. And so what I do now is I play. We do a 2-hour set nowadays. Mm-hmm. So in those days with Alvin, it was 1 hour 10 minutes tops, including encores. Yeah. So nowadays I play all of the set except the drum solo with traditional grip.
How does that change your style? I mean, has that changed your style, or are you?
To a degree, because in the early days as well, one of the problems was I had carpal tunnel quite early on with the early American tours, because we were doing 3 months at a time.
Yeah.
And I went to the Leahy Clinic in Boston. Don Law, the promoter there, was going out with the daughter of one of the head. I think he was the head of the clinic actually, and I went to see him. I always say I was probably the only patient who ever went there for free, because it was a private clinic.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Princess Margaret used to go there. And he said, "Well, you've got to rest it. You've got carpal tunnel." And he said, "The rest is the only thing." I said, "Well, I can't. I'm in the middle of a tour." Yeah. So the alternative suggestion, which was okay, was to put a cold, wet compress on overnight. I used to sleep basically with a cold, wet compress on the wrist. But the golf elbow. Did it change my style? Sorry, yes. So the reason I went to Madonna at Leahy Clinic was we all played rim shots all the time then. Bobby Elliott, I got it from Bobby Elliott. I think Clive played with rim shots. We all did. And that's a terrific way of getting shock absorption up your arm. It's the best thing you can do. Yeah. And of course, none of us had been taught to let go of the stick as we make the shot either. So it was all solid.
Elbow on down, yeah.
Right. And so in a sense the style changed, because I never rim shotted after that. After I'd been to Leahy Clinic, he said, "Really and truly, I think you should stop. Is there another way of doing it?" I said, "Well, I'll just hit the center of the drum. It's the only way around it, really." Right. And occasionally do rim. Like the only time I do rim shots now is for accents in the drum solo.
Right. Or jokes.
Sorry.
Or jokes.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's the playing.
Funnily enough, I'm going to get physical therapy this afternoon for golf elbow.
There you go.
Wow.
It's also called wanker syndrome.
So what you got to do? Yeah, and when you're playing golf, that's the problem.
I've never played golf in my life. At this point, it's almost all Alvin compositions, right, Rick?
Yeah, the only time we got there was a bit of a dispute, and that's why we all ended up doing an individual track on Shush, was it? No, on
Stonehenge. Yeah.
Stonehenge, sorry.
Stonehenge, yeah. So was he? Sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, it's just he said, I hear you've all been talking to Mike, and you want to write the songs, but I can't write songs. I can't sing other people's lyrics, which was a bit of bullshit, because that's what the whole of the first album was, as somebody said earlier. They were covers, and he sang other people's lyrics. So anyway, he said, but I think what we should do, we should all do a separate track, a solo track. And I think, in a way, he was chucking down the challenge, to see if anybody could come up with anything. And in fact, Chick came up with the Adventures of a Young Organ, which Alvin then copped to half the writing on, because he said, I can do that. We can do this, So that Chick ended up halving his, I think. Or was it I Can't Live Without Lydia? Oh, God, I get mixed up.
Yeah, I Can't Live Without Lydia was the solo song on Stonehenge, but yeah, I know that later on, yeah, there's the Adventures of a Young Organ where they're co-credited.
Actually, Adventures of Young Organ's on the first album, isn't it? And that's a co-credit. Yep. Yeah, and then and you're right, I Can't Live Without Lydia was on Stonehenge. And that, as I say, I think that was a challenge, just to see if any of us could come up with a song,
Monte.
I thought Stonehenge was a pretty giant step up from the debut record, and it also makes sense that there was a year in between. But when you listen to it, it's the band writing their own material, the whole thing. Maybe it's because of the solo tracks. The whole thing just sounds a little more progressive, a little more interesting to me. Like, really, I think a big progression for the band. And then a further progression happened on the Shush record. As David had mentioned before, the production values were so much higher. The whole record just came across to me as, by far, of the first four records, by far the most mature, the best produced, and the best tracks. And of course, the guitar-bass battle in the middle of Good Morning Little Schoolgirl is like the highlight, of every 10 years after the concert since, pretty much. But I think both of those records were just the band continuing to grow. You could hear a huge progression from the first to Stonehenge to Shush.
Well, thanks. I mean,
yeah.
I've just realised why it took so long with the other records, because when we knew we were going to America, we were working on Stonehenge at the time, but we were never going to get it finished in time for the first American tour. So that's why we went to Kluk's Kleek, which was right next door to Decca Studios, and recorded the live album Undead, so we could get that out for the first American tour. That's why there's a long gap. I'd forgotten that.
All right, well, let's move on. We'll combine Cricklewood Green and Watt, both released in 1970. Why don't you briefly talk about those two records, the recording of those, Rick?
Well, I think that was the first time we worked in Olympic Studios. And we worked in Olympic No. 1, which was the big film studio where they used to put huge, great orchestras in to play the film music. We were in No. 1. In No. 2, the Stones were in there quite a lot, which was the smaller studio. And I think they liked the intimacy of No. 2. We did record in 2 later, but first of all, we were in No. 1. The Who recorded in No. 1 a lot of the time as well. In fact, when we'd moved to No. 2, The Who came in and recorded in 1. So the classic track out of there is Love Like a Man, of course. So we recorded that in No. 1. I remember doing that. I can actually see myself sitting on the kit there. We only used about half of that studio, but it wasn't blanked off in any way. I guess it was like a big theatre, with a very high roof and a long way from the control room to the back wall, so that it could accommodate, a 30, 40-piece orchestra in there. But we used to set up fairly close to the control room window, and we were facing the control room window, so I could see Andy Johns quite easily from where I was sitting. Although it was actually you look down from the control room window, about 4 or 5 steps up from the studio up to the control room. But it was I liked it there because I could actually get the ambience there of the kit, and I think Alvin liked it there for reasons for when he was dubbing the guitars, because it was a large area. You could have it loud and you could get the sound that you wanted on it really well. And all of that was played together. There was no the only overdubs would have been vocals and maybe lead guitar solos and stuff.
You did a great bebop tune on that album, the Me and My Baby. It was a great.
Yeah.
It was great. We did that in my high school band.
Oh, wow.
One of the songs we did was that song. It was such a great, again, the drums, a lot of that subtlety, man, on your cymbals and stuff. It was great.
The jazzy stuff, yeah. Well, that became a bit of a not a problem, but more or less on every record, Alvin would come along and he'd always talk to me first about it. He'd say, I've got this song or this feel. What do you think? I said, oh, it's great. He said, yeah, it's kind of jazzy, isn't it? I said, yeah, it is. He said, do you want to do that? I said, yeah, I think we should.
Yeah.
And then Theo would be saying, what the fuck are we doing? We're supposed to be a rock band. We're supposed to be a rock band. What's going on?
Yeah.
Don't do that crap.
I'm not going to walk.
We always managed, between us, Alvin and I managed to squeeze a swing
track.
Well,
a lot of times, it's funny because you'll get friction like that in the band, and you'll actually get a sound of that friction. Like with Leo pulling against the jazz thing, like, no, I'm going to make this rock. I'll make this jazz, motherfucker. And it's like, a lot of times it's that pull that actually makes it magic.
Yeah, but he was, when I met him, I mean, like I said, a lot of stuff they were doing I didn't know at all, but he was the master of the walking bass.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, absolutely. I got a question for you, Rick. When I listen to Cricklewood Green, to me that sounds like such a reinvention in sound for the band, like moving away from blues boom to just more of a straight-up mainstream rock sound. It's like massively different to me from what you guys were doing earlier. And probably I would call that record the band's potentially the masterpiece of the whole catalog. Was that change in sound something you aimed for, or did it just kind of happen naturally?
No, I think it just happened. Obviously, the way that Alvin was writing material was changing. Obviously, when you get that's your starting point, and then everybody chucks in their 10 penneth, And as I said, for example, with the Stomp, I was always trying to find something that would make what I considered quite ordinary into something a bit different.
Yeah.
I was going to just argue the toss with you about I think the absolute nadir of the band, and certainly with Alvin and me, our trading off one another, the way we worked off one another, is the Live at the Fillmore album, Live at the Fillmore East. I didn't realize until I heard that album back again not long ago that we really were in the same groove. We were right in the mold together. It was incredible. So to me, that's the highlight of the band's performance, if you like.
The version of Love Like a Man that's on Fillmore East, that was the version that was on the B-side of the Love Like a Man single, wasn't it?
I believe it was. What they did was, Decca wanted a single, so they took the studio version and they cut it down to, it was 7.5 minutes, I think, and they cut it down to 3. And so the guitar solo, actually, it's just one note, it just goes, boo, and that's all you get on the A-side. And Alvin said, you can't do that, that's not fair on the fans,
Yeah.
Okay, if you're going to do that, we want the full-length version on the B-side. And they said, well, we can't do that because you can't fit it into 45. And he said, right, well, B-side can be at 33. So there you go.
All right.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you wanted to add about those two albums before we move on?
Well, this came out in April 1970, so it's the highest charting 10 years after album on the U.S. charts. Got 14 over here. I'm just wondering, is this because of the Woodstock effect? Because, in August '69, you've got Woodstock, you play there, the film has come out. So when this is released,
yes,
is this why maybe the surge in popularity was because of People
Yeah,
seeing you at Woodstock.
I hadn't thought of that because I wasn't aware of the fact that it was the highest charting record, to be honest. But
that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here.
Good.
And that's going to be another 10 quid. Okay?
Yes. David may be a Luddite, but he's got the internet open right in front of him right now, so he's looking all this stuff up.
The internet open.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Thinking about it, yeah, that would make a lot of sense. And in fact, the reason that came out in 1970, and by that time we'd also played the Isle of Wight Festival, and Sweet Little 16 is on there. I think that's the closing track, isn't it?
On what?
Yes.
Yeah, the live track.
On what? Yeah.
I'd forgotten. Well, I'd been drinking brandy with Keith Moon all afternoon, so I was a little bit inebriated when we did the set, and the mic on the snare drum, it kept dropping down out of the mic stand. It was a Shaw 57. It kept just dropping onto and I kept putting it back, and I was shouting to the crew, and nobody was taking any notice of me. And so when it dropped the fifth time onto the snare, I just ripped it off and threw it away, completely forgetting that Pi were recording through the microphone. So when we came into the studio, we came into number one at Olympic to listen back and choose tracks that we could put on from the Isle of Wight Festival. Decided that was the one they wanted to run with, but of course the snare drum was nowhere near loud enough. But I think Andy Johns got around that by somehow sending it out to a speaker in the studio and then re-recording it through that speaker. I don't quite know how that worked, but he kind of saved the track, so that's a story for what.
All right, well, let's get into Space and Time. Obviously, your biggest record, I believe the only platinum record at the time here in the U.S., had the huge song, I'd Love to Change the World. Let me ask you first, Rick, I know that was a time where somebody's in trouble. I hear a siren in the background.
No, it's me. I'm sitting right here in a Manhattan apartment, and I'm trying to cover the phone so you guys don't hear it, but I guess I'm not doing it.
All right. Well, let's go into the Space and Time. And regarding the change in sound, was that your first for Chrysalis here in the States? I know you were you and Jethro Tull were one of the original Chrysalis bands, or was the previous albums released on Chrysalis here?
Well, what they did was actually halfway through the Decca contract, they negotiated to set up Chrysalis Productions. So we were then signed to the production company. I guess Tull were too. And they also picked up Procol Harum at that point. And what they did, it was very clever actually. The production company came in and then signed everything over to Decca for the last three records. So that would be Shush, Crickle, Green and What. And then they set up Chrysalis Records when that contract came to an end. And then Chrysalis Productions became Chrysalis Records, and Chrysalis Records then licensed the deal to Columbia. I believe that's how it went, or we signed with an inducement letter. And what they did, they went all around Europe with the three acts, because Tull had been on Ireland, and they originally had Chrysalis Records had a distribution deal with Ireland for the first two records, I think, that they did under Chrysalis Records. We'd gone to Columbia, and they Procol Harum was signed to Chrysalis Records as well then, and Europe, and they made distribution deals with Phonogram in one territory and Teldec in another, and so on and so forth. So basically, they had all the distribution deals set up in Europe, which meant that they were then getting themselves a much bigger percentage than just being managers. They went from 20% to 40%. So it's quite a nice deal for them. So I'm just trying to think where we made that. We made that, and that was done in Studio 2 at Olympic. That's the smaller studio. The interesting story, certainly for me there, was that when we did I'd Love to Change the World, I was ill, and I was off for 2 days. And when I came back, they'd put the track down without me. But there were no click tracks in those days, no metronome. So I listened to it. They said, why don't you put the drums on? So I listened to it, and of course there were fluctuations in the time. And I thought, oh, blimey, this is going to be good, trying to do this. Anyway, the drum kit in number 2, again, the level of the studio at 2, the control room was below the actual recording room in 2. So you went up about 4 or 5 steps up to the actual studio from the control room. And the window was set in the wall. And so when I sat, the drum kit was set up near the window as well. I don't think it was for an ambient reason, because the studio was pretty dead, as I recall. And so when I looked down to the control room, I'd be looking down at everybody. And when we did that track, Alvin came and stood by the control room window to kind of help me. And he was like looking up. So he would be looking up and seeing basically, first of all, like my knees, my feet on the pedals. We could actually see each other's heads by moving a little bit, so we had a visual communication. So anyway, they ran the track, and I listened through to it, and they said, would you like to have a go? So I said, yeah, go on, run it, and we'll see what we can get. So it's not exactly this precise, but a rough idea of what it was like was I got to the end of the verses and going into the chorus, and then there was quite a change of tempo. Well, I say quite a change. You probably don't notice it now, but it was fairly noticeable to me at the time. So we did what was called drop-ins. You'll know what they are, Mark.
I do. Yeah, you punched it. You punched it. But look, at that point, you were still on 2-inch tape. So that wasn't as easy as it is now with digital, man. You had to have somebody that really had to be able to cut that thing in and anticipate the tape heads. So that's not easy with a full kit, mate. Yeah.
So we ran up to that point, and they said, right, we'll drop you in from there. So I said, okay, fine. And what you do on the drop in, as you well know, Mark, is that you run the track, you play along with it, and then they punch it in wherever they think it should be. They have to be very careful, as you rightly say, if you've got a ride cymbal or something, that it doesn't get cut
off or start off. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we do that, and Alvin's looking at me, and he's sort of thumbs up, and I'm going, no, I can do it better than that. I can get it closer than that. So we did it again, and I think it was either take 2 or 3. I got the whole thing with the drop-in, and I'm very proud of that to this day because it came a top 40 hit.
Yeah.
So Rick, you basically
sessions like that.
So Rick, you overdubbed the drums to an existing track.
The track was acoustic guitar, keyboards, and bass. And I think maybe Alvin had put a little of electric guitar on there as well. I can't honestly remember. But yeah, I dubbed to all that.
Yeah, definitely not easy to do. Because, usually the tracks are built around the drums come first and everyone comes after. So to bring the drums in after the fact definitely takes a lot of skill.
Yeah, I've got to do a video actually in the next few days to explain the Deco Entertainment, who are putting out the new album, the deluxe version, have asked me to do a video explaining the differences between recording in the 60s and recording now. So that's the next project I have.
David.
Yeah, I love this album. I mean, it's much more mature in terms of songwriting and, again, production. The production of the albums just gets better and better every time. And even though there's, a lot more acoustic guitar and the songs are more sort of down-tempo, they don't drag because of the like I said, the maturity of the songwriting. But as I think probably everybody here knows, I'd Love to Change the World was his top 40 hit, but you never played it live. In fact, apart from, I believe, One of These Days, you didn't play any of this album live, did you?
Not to my recollection, no. I agree with you. I think it marked certainly a maturity in Alvin's songwriting. I thought he'd really come of age when he wrote that material.
Was there pressure from the label at all because I know, bands like Zeppelin, they released Zeppelin 3 and of course Zeppelin 4 was Stairway to Heaven, and that became kind of the trendy acoustic, heavy song. Was that, and that was a different direction at the time for 10 years after, a lot more acoustic. Was there pressure from the label?
Clive Davis said to us, if you give me the right track, I'll give you a gold record, because we'd never had a gold record with London Records. Which was 400,000 copies in those days. I think you're right. I think it's gone platinum since.
Yeah.
But that's what he said. And essentially that's what Alvin gave him. But then Clive invited me several occasions I got on very well with him. And I respected him as a very good record man. And he invited me to a promotion meeting, which they had on a Monday morning at CBS building on 6th Avenue. And we were in town for a few days. And so I went along And I sat in on this thing, and it was like on this huge boardroom table around which sat about 40 different people from around the country who were the promotion men in the local markets. And they'd all come in on the red eye. And so Clive would sit at the head of this boardroom table. I sat fairly close to him up there. Steve Popovich was there, who was the head of promotion. And I've forgotten there was another guy that was Clive's main assistant. And so they would say, okay, so who wants to kick off? And so somebody would stick his hand up and say, Fred Burfel from Nashville or whatever. Yeah, we're doing pretty good with Chicago. We're getting great reaction to the new single. We're getting great reaction from whatever other act, and said, and 10 years after, we're getting a pickup on I'd Love to Change the World. And so that's how it went around the table. And then they would talk about how they were going to, what incentives they were going to give, where they're going to do prizes on the radio, competitions, whatever. And then the next one I went to, we'd had the hit with I'd Love to Change the World, and Clive said to me, we want to release Tomorrow I'll Be Out of Town as your next single. We think we could do something really good with that. Come to the promotion meeting, see what happens. And everybody was giving that feedback. This is the one we want to run with next. And after the meeting, I said, Alvin doesn't want that to be put out as a single. And he said, why not? I said, don't ask me, ask him. I have no idea why. And he said, well, that's crazy. He said, I've asked you to give me the tools. He said, you've given me the tools. Now you won't let me do the job with them. And I said, well, hang on a minute. Don't drag me into that. I'm very happy for you to get us another hit single, believe me. I've no problem with that. I said, but you got a problem with Alvin. You need to talk to him. And basically after that, we didn't have any more. And Clive lost interest. He moved on. And that was very sad because we had a real chance of making a bigger career out of it than we already had. Wow. But Alvin, to be fair to him, he didn't like the AM market because all that stuff was coming through the AM market as it was then. FM wasn't as big as it is now, and we ended up playing venues where there'd be a lot of screaming girls, and teeny boppers, and that was Alvin's was definitely against that. He said, I'm a musician. I'm not a teeny bop player,
Rick, was not playing I'd Love to Change the World live, was that some type of rebellion by Alvin?
No, his argument...
Like against that, or...?
No, his argument was always that he couldn't do it justice because of the acoustic guitar and the electric guitar, which again, Marcus Bonfanti, who's our current singer guitar player, who is fantastic, by the way, he does it. But what he does is he plays it all on the electric guitar and then changes the sound for the electric guitar solos. So he plays it like a semi-acoustic to start with, and then switches it to another sound for the electric part. Joe Gooch used to do that. Joe Gooch did it with us. Joe actually at one point had an acoustic guitar on a stand, on a special stand, so he could play the first verses up to the chorus, and then switched it. So he had the electric guitar around his neck and leaned over the acoustic guitar and played that, and then moved away from it and did the electric solo, and one of the crew would then move the acoustic off stage. So it was all doable, but it's just something Alvin didn't want to do.
Was the label pressuring you guys to play that song live when you were touring in support of the record?
I don't recall them doing that, but they may well have been pestering Chris Wright, but that wouldn't necessarily have fed back to me at that time.
So why didn't you play any of the other material apart from One of These Days? There was nothing else that you played live from that album, and it's such a great album. Well,
it was Alvin's choice of what we played on stage. I know he had difficulty with remembering lyrics, so that may have had something to do with it. The other thing was when we did the About Time album many years later in Memphis, we actually learned 5 of the tracks from that, and it was getting heavy rotation on, I don't think it's there now, but there was a TV thing. It wasn't MTV, but there was something, the equivalent of that in Europe, and then we were getting heavy rotation on that from the track they took as a single. What was it? Oh, God, I can't remember. Highway of Love. And we learned 5 tracks from the new album, and I thought they were great. We put them in the set. And within about as many weeks, Alvin had gotten rid of them all, and we were back to the old set that we've been doing since 1976. or whatever.
Was there a long version of Uncle Jam? Because that was the only disappointment on the album, is that it only lasted this glorious minute and a half, and then it was gone. It was this great jam that you guys did on, I think it was the end of side 1, right? It was great.
Yeah,
it just kind of faded it in. It was like, where the hell's the rest of this tune? It was so fucking cool.
Well, what we did, we just sat down and jammed stuff.
Yeah.
And in some places it got a bit soggy, you know.
Yeah.
Bit drear. So we then switched to something else and changed the tempo or whatever.
Yeah, because it fades into another section of it, you know, and then it fades back out, which was cool, but it was very cool. 3
sections, because it basically was 3 jams, and we just took what we considered the best bits and crossfade.
Wow. Yeah.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on to 1972, Rock and Roll Music to the World. And let's combine the live album, which was recorded a year later in 73. And that's when I got turned on to 10 years after. I remember my cousin made a compilation tape. I must have been like at 9 years old at the time. It had Black Sabbath, Humble Pie from the Performance Fillmore album. It had 10 years after, Good Morning Little Schoolgirl, and You Give Me Lovin'. It had Black Sabbath, Zeppelin, and I thought 10 years after were just as heavy as Sabbath. The production on that album, even though they're blues songs, it was just so dark and heavy. And just, I remember as a kid, there was nothing like that. And I still think today, one of the best recorded live albums, I know you did that entirely live, which was uncommon in the 70s. Such a great album. Why don't you talk about those 2 albums, Rick?
So you were the one you were talking about sounding heavy, was that recorded live? Yeah?
Yeah, that was recorded live. The 2 songs in particular, Good Morning Little Schoolgirl and You Give Me Lovin'. And those 2 songs were just like, to me, like, you know, as a 9-year-old kid at the time, it was like, man, this is so heavy. And I considered you and Sabbath like the epitome of heavy metal at the time, you know?
Well, I never considered us a heavy metal band, and I think that was a great compliment that you put us in the same breath as Black Sabbath. But I think one of the reasons was it was recorded on, I think, 3 or 4 different occasions on a European tour. There were some tracks taken from Paris, some were taken from the Jahrhunderthalle in Frankfurt, and I think there was a couple taken from somewhere in Holland.
Amsterdam?
Amsterdam, yeah. Yeah.
Rotterdam and Amsterdam. Amsterdam were the other 2. Yeah.
It was both of them. I've not looked at it for a while, but yeah. So I think it was recorded. I'm pretty sure it was the Stones Mobile that we did it with, and I'm trying to think who was the engineer on that. I guess it was Chris Kimsey. In fact, I know it was. Yeah, Chris Kimsey, who actually had been working with the Stones a lot. So I can only put it down to the way that Chris recorded it and mixed it, you know, and the sound of the instruments as we had them on stage.
Brilliant.
What was the other album? The Rock and Roll Music to the World.
Right.
That actually was done in Studio 2 at Olympic, and that would be Chris Kimsey again. In fact, it was Chris Kimsey on Space in Time, come to think of it. That album, we actually went to the south of France. We rented a villa out there on Cap Ferrat, which is opposite where David Niven, the film star, used to live. Oh. And we set the drums up in the hallway of this place, and it had there was a great big arch, and I put the kit right underneath the arch, and it had tile floors and everything, and the sound of the kit was amazing. It was really good. It's a big black Gretsch kit I had at that time, a 24-inch bass drum. So maybe we're going in the direction of Sabbath.
Or Bonham.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I borrowed, actually, Bonham lent me a bass drum, a 24-inch, 26, actually.
Yeah, he played the big ones, yeah.
Yeah, when we were in New York one time, we were up in the Catskills, we were there for about a week, and they lent me this bass drum, and inside it had pieces of paper that were folded up, the crushed newspaper, slung in the bottom of the kit, and the way that worked was when you hit the 26, of course it went, if you didn't have anything in it. Right. But when you had the paper in it, you hit it, and the paper bounced up and killed the sound, then dropped down again. So you still had the resonance, but you had it.
Yeah, you just didn't have the ring out. Yeah.
Which
so did you? In other words, what would be your ideal kit? The one that you feel like your style best conducive. Like every favorite guitar that they use that they know is like surfing down the pipeline of the ocean.
Yeah.
What would be your your ideal kit? In other words, the amount of drums and the size of your bass drum and all of that. Do you have one?
The kit I loved for years was my Ludwig Super Classic in silver glitter like Joe Morello. It was
Sure. I know Joe.
It was just a 22 bass drum, a 13 tom, and a 16 tom. And I think in those days, I never used the all metal Ludwig 400 snare drum. I always liked the acrylite, so I used the acrylite. I had a Rogers kit, but I found that I don't know. It didn't resonate the way I expected it, and the Dynasonic
probably a lot different too, wasn't it? The response,
Oh yeah, and the Dynasonic snare drum was I never liked at all. It just seemed to choke up all the time.
What were your sticks? What size sticks did you use?
Oh, they were Premier in those days. They're usually about 5. But no, the kit. I liked the Black Gretsch kit. That was good. But the bass drum got too big for me after a while. 24-inch bass drum. I thought no. Yeah. I have at home. I've got a lovely little maple Gretsch, 1967. That I really. It's a 20-inch bass drum, a 12-inch tom, and a 14 floor.
Yeah, I play a lot with Danny Seraphin, and he had a little DW 20-inch, and it was amazing how much low end you got out of those things.
That's right. Yeah.
Amazing.
No, I recorded at Alvin's place one time with the little Gretsch, and the engineer, I've forgotten his name, Stuart. I can't remember his surname. And after we'd done the run through, he said we were getting ready for the take. He came in, he said that kit sounds amazing. He said that bass drum has really got something.
Yeah.
And also, one of the things I think makes a difference, and I used it for ages, but the trouble is they don't make a double pedal of it. And I don't use double bass. I use double pedals, but not double bass drums.
Yeah.
With the Ludwig Speed King, it's got to be the best and loudest bass drum pedal ever, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But the kit I use in Europe now is a Mapex. I'm an endorsee, and that's really nice. That's a 20. They don't make it anymore. It's the Orion kit. It's maple. They've stopped making them for some reason. The king of the Mapex is now Saturn kit, which used to be number 2.
Yeah.
The bass drums are 22, and then I've got what have I got? A 12, a 14, and a 14. I don't like big floor toms.
Okay.
When you get to 16, they get so hard to tune, and they go.
Well, they ring, and they also, when you're recording, you can tell they just go the whole time. You have to end up muting them in the recording. So yeah.
So that's good, and I use Feisty cymbals. I love them.
Yeah.
Right.
I've been using them for years and years now. Yeah, so I set this kit up in the south of France for the Rock and Roll Music to the World album, and I loved it. The sound was fantastic. We got on famously. Everybody else was there were all rooms off this hallway, so the guys actually sat in the hallway so we could see each other, but the amplifiers were off in the other room, so we could get some sort of semblance of separation. We took the tracks back to England, and we never used them. We recorded the album back in number 2 for some reason. I've never known why. But that album actually is now available. They did Chrysalis got the catalogue back, and they did a box set of the years from 1967 to 75, which was the Alvin years, which has got I think it's 10 or is it 6? I can't remember exactly. Vinyl records, and it's also got CDs in it of all the albums through that period. And one of the bonus one with it was what they call the Cap Ferrar sessions, which were the ones that we never used before, the ones that were done in the villa down in the south of France. And they sound great. Yeah, really chuffed with that.
Oh, I got to check those out. So those are with the drum tones that you're describing that you love so much.
That was with the Gretsch kit.
Oh, okay.
No, if you want to hear the Mapex kit, that's on an album called Naturally Alive that we did about 2 years ago with the current lineup. And that's where the track I'd Love to Change the World, the live track, comes from, is on the Sting in the Tail Deluxe edition.
David, was there anything you wanted to add about these 2 records?
The only thing I'd say is, like I said, I did the liner notes for Recorded Live, and I also consulted on it, and it was such a blast to hear the rest of the material and be able to put that on the 2 CDs. And also, one of the things, and I actually discussed this with Mark and another friend of ours, I said, I'm definitely going to put the bloody drum solo back in Hobbit. Yeah, recorded live. I think it's an amazing album, and I'm just glad that, it's out there in its entirety now.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Sure.
All right. Well, I guess we'll move on to the final release with the Alvin years before the band reunited, Positive Vibrations in 1974. Talk a little bit about that, Rick. By then, there was a little bit of friction between the band and Alvin during that time.
The reason that album got finished was because I was determined that it would get finished so we could pick up the advance.
It's good motivation, mate.
Yeah, we did it down at Alvin's studio at Hook End, and Alvin and Leo really were very close, is I think the best way I can put it. Anyway, we got it recorded, but nobody wanted to be bothered to mix it. So I sat with the engineer and just kept going until the damn thing was finished, and we had something that was deliverable. But it's not the best album, I don't think, by any means. Although I was not aware of it, but some reviewer many years ago said that it was us and The Who were the first to start using synthesizers in rock music. So, so that was a first, I think. Whether that's the case, I don't know, but that's what somebody wrote.
Kind of ironic that it's called Positive Vibrations, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. So, any comments about it yourself?
It's the only thing that I remember when I bought it, and what struck me was how much mellower it was, that the songs were much more relaxed, and there wasn't a whole lot of energy on it. But from what I've read since, including interviews with you, Rick, it's, the circumstances sort of explain why.
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, and I was living in Kent at the time, and Alvin's house was in Berkshire. So it was a good 2 to 3 hour drive for me if I was going to go every day. So I stayed at Alvin's place. He very kindly put me up. But I was on a waterbed in there, which had no heating, which is not desirable by any means.
Yeah.
So, I probably, although the record sounds relaxed, I probably wasn't that relaxed because I wasn't sleeping very much.
I'm reading the autobiography of Ted Templeman right now, the producer, and he talks about doing Van Halen's 1984 album, and at that point Eddie Van Halen had built his own studio, so they're having to do it there. And he said one of the problems is that when you're in a regular studio and the clock's running, there's sort of a sense of urgency to get things done.
Yeah.
But when you're in a studio that somebody owns, it's like, we don't got to finish this because we're not on the clock and we can do it tomorrow or the next day. Was that situation here?
What, with Pos Vibes?
Yeah.
No, I think it was the opposite, really. That everybody wanted to get it finished and get the hell out of there. as I recall, I was in a difficult position there because I was staying with Alvin. He was putting me up to a degree. They were feeding me, So if I got a chance just to get out to get some fresh air and that, I would probably go down the pub and have a meal or meet. I have friends who live fairly close, so I go and have a meal with them sometimes, just for a break from it, because otherwise I wasn't getting out of the scenario at all. So it was difficult for me. And then of course on the other side I was having to I don't want to use the wrong words here. Being friendly with Chick and Leo as well. So I mean, it was used, actually, what I'm about to say was used a lot earlier than this. But, in Spinal Tap, where the drummer who's sitting there smoking his pipe, and somebody says to him, "What's your role?" And he said, "Well, I'm kind of the buffer between these two."
Yes, it was Derek Smalls. He's saying, yes, I'm kind of played the role of lukewarm water.
Lukewarm water.
And so our tour manager at the time was a guy called Derek Sutton, who is the manager of Robin Chowd these days. And Derek was a big friend of Rob Reiner, the guy that did Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
And Derek and I were talking one day, and he said, "It's incredible, Rick." He said, "Whenever Leo and Alvin hit it, kick off," he said, you're in the middle there trying to sort it all." He said, "And Chick disappears." And I said, "Yeah, well, I'm just the buffer." Now, whether that was actually a quote that Derek then gave to Rob Reiner for the movie, I don't know.
I'll have to ask Harry. I play with Derek Smalls. I'm Derek's guitar player, actually. It was a funny mention. I'll tell you very quickly. When Spinal Tap was playing in Europe, one of the amps went out, right? And Harry looked to the side and is going, he's signaling to the roadie like, my amp's gone out, and they're going like, yeah, right, because they thought it was part of the act.
Yes,
because they're so convinced to it, so they had to develop a safe word, so that they knew, like, we're not fucking around. The amp actually went out because they thought they were so convinced, because they were so good at shit going wrong, that they thought it was just part of the act. It took them a while to catch on,
Maybe that's what happened at the Isle of Wight.
Yeah, it could be. You never know where that stuff comes from, man.
That's a great story, Mark. I love it.
It was very funny. Yeah.
So there's a couple of stories about those albums.
Can I ask you a question? These problems with Alvin and Leo, were they new to that period, or did they just kind of peak at that point?
No, before I joined them, Leo used to tell me that when they went out on the road and if they had an argument, they'd end up having fisticuffs.
Have a straight out.
Right. So that was a long-running problem that just kind of boiled over at that period.
Well, I think the main problem was, in my opinion, Leo always wanted to be Alvin, and you can't be somebody else.
Yeah.
You have to be what you are, and Leo was very good at what he did. And was a good foil for Alvin as well, because Alvin could be quite lazy, and so he would get a kick up the backside, really, from. But that was one of Dave Quickmire's problems. I found out later, was that he ended up not getting on with either of them, so it wasn't a comfortable place to be, And then there were great times as well. We had times together when we really funny times and good times, and we all got on great. So
yeah.
And it's the same with most bands, I think.
Yep, pretty much.
Although I have to say the current lineup, which is, as I said, Marcus Bonfanti, Colin Hodgkinson, Chick and me, is fantastic. It's like four mates who've known each other all their lives. And we hang out together, actually, it's funny. When we first went out on the road, Marcus and I used to go out for a drink afterwards. We'd find a bar somewhere and go and have a drink. And we used to do that most nights. Colin and Chick usually go straight off after the gig, and I guess go to bed. I don't really know what they get up to when they've left the gig, but they're off straight away. And Marcus and I are usually hanging around and going back to the hotel with the crew when the crew have packed everything up and ready to go. And quite often I deal with the merchandise money as well, so I'm usually waiting for the young lady to cash up with me or whatever. So when we were going out, Marcus and I, and then quite often when we get back to the hotel, we'll have a few drinks with the crew. And so Colin now calls us the All Night Brothers. But it's a totally different relationship now. It really is a joy, and it was a joy to make A Sting in the Tail, the studio version, because it's the first time. You were talking about the songs and it being mainly Alvin's writing and so on. This is the first time that Chick and I have been involved in a collaborative process, and it's been great. Marcus was the hub, because he's the chord man and he's got to sing the stuff and he needs to know the lyrics are going to work for him and so on. Mm-hmm. But he was the hub, so I went down and wrote several songs with Marcus. I can't remember, I think about 8 or so, maybe more. Colin, we call him the Riffmeister, which is German for Riffmaster. So Colin and Marcus put some stuff together, some really good stuff, and then Chick went in and worked with Marcus. Then we all went into the rehearsal studio and basically took it apart and put it back together again, So we had the verses and choruses, and then we might have added a middle eight later, and we polished it and honed it and got the introduction sorted out, and then, any links we might want to have from a verse to a chorus or whatever, and put it all together until we got an album that we felt really, really comfortable with. And as I say, we tried to make it a radio-friendly album, And I think we've achieved that. The feedback I've had from doing all these interviews I'm doing about the album and about my book has been incredible. People really seem to like it, so that's a real bonus.
I can speak firsthand there, Rick, because to be honest, the last records I have by the band are the ones that they did with Joe Gooch.
Yeah.
So, prior to this interview, Chip shared Sting in the Tail with us, and I know that record came out in 2017. But I really just first got about listening to it yesterday in preparation for this interview. And the first thing I wrote back to Chip was how shocked I was at how impressive the record was for a band to lose 2 key members and yet continue on, at this day and age, like making such vital music. Like a track like Land of the Vandals just blows me away. And I just wrote to him, I'm like, I can't believe how great, like, this is better than it has a right to be, given that it's two guys left, and listen what they're doing. I mean, I was really blown away, I got to be honest.
Yeah, but at the same time, do you often wonder, Rick, if you would have had more freedom back in the day from Alvin to create, how the songs would have turned out, how the band would have morphed and changed if you guys had more writing influence?
I do. I think we were soft. I think we should have put up more of a fight and said, no, we're going to be involved and this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
The trouble with that is that he may have thrown his toys out the pram and gone home. That was the risk with it. And it was quite early days, really. We were trying to hold everything together.
You're caught up in the inertia of the band as well, and so you don't want to upset anything that's working. So I get that don't fix it if it ain't broke. Yeah. But, it would be interesting from my standpoint as a fan and as a listener to know what your influences would have been had you been allowed, the freedom to express yourself, not only rhythmically, like bringing what your craft brings, but also your compositional, compositional skills and chicks too at the same time,
From my own point of view, with the material on this album, the thing Marcus said about it, he said, which was amazing for him. A few weeks before we started doing Sting in the Tail, he'd been working with a young pop singer who got an amazingly silly deal with a record company in England, and had a minor hit, which I think had been written for him by somebody else. And then the record company wanted him to write stuff. So he said he got together with this kid, and he said, okay, so what are we going to do today? What ideas have you got? And the kid said, well, I don't really have any. He said, well, you must have something. He said, no, I don't know. Have you got any suggestions, And he said the guy had no idea, he got no experience because he was young, and just nothing to draw on. He said then when he sat down, I was first in on this. He said when he sat down with me, he said, actually, before we actually started writing, I told him about an idea I had, which was Saran Saran, which was me falling in love with a girl on TV in a show like Cagney and Lacey. It was a cop thing. And so the song's built around that. And Marcus immediately changed one of the lyrics. I think it was Saran Saran, I want to be your man. And he said, no, let's make it I could have been your man, because that's more like the truth.
Well, so, the truth, yeah, sure, yeah.
And Colin's dad used to work on the railways, and that's where Iron Horse comes from. So Colin had got this riff, and that track is heavily riff-based, and then it's about the railways, so they call it Iron Horse. Chick then came up with Last Night of the Bottle, which was about him and a girlfriend trying to make things work, and it was not going to, so they were having their last drink together, Silver Spoon Lady is actually about Chick's first wife, who he says was born with a silver spoon in her mouth and didn't really know any reality, Two Lost Souls started from me, which was about when I was getting separated from my, hang on, I'm trying to think which wife it was. The last wife.
All right.
That's
number five.
Only my second, sorry. I was separated, and I met this girl that I knew. She was working somewhere, and I walked in, and she didn't look very well. And I said, God, you don't look so well. She said, well, you've been through what I've been through. You look and feel the same, And so then we sort of went out for drinks and consoled each other a bit, and that's why it was Two Lost Souls. And then Up in Smoke is totally Marcus, really. It's an acoustic-based track.
It's a great blues song.
It is.
It really is.
I'm trying to persuade him to do it. We do a semi-acoustic spot in the set, and I'm trying to persuade him to do that, and us leave him to it and let him get on with it. But he's not biting at the moment. But I'll keep working on him. But yeah, and apparently Colin told me that he more or less wrote that in the car on the way up to my place to when we got a rehearsal for the album.
A lot of times the quick ones are the good ones. I don't mean that.
I think he got the nuts and bolts. He just put the finishing touches to it, And then I mean, there's what you were saying earlier, Mark. I used brushes on that.
Did you? Yeah.
Yeah, because it just screamed out to me that
that's the thing is having, that's the thing is you I always look at a band like Lee Marvin, you know, and the Magnificent Seven, where he hires Trini Lopez to do the ballistics. He hires, you know, Burt Lancaster to work the females, you know, where they all have their specialty, right? And he just stays out of their way because he knows that they're the best at what they do, you know. So that's the thing is, you have somebody like you on drums. It's like, leave you to it. I mean, it's not that you can't come up with, you know, that someone can't come up with ideas, but it works differently with writing because everybody has experiences. Everybody can read, you know, has things, relationships. So anyone, if given permission, can be a writer. You know, if they're just given permission to do it. And you find out that a lot of times some of the best songs were not written by the guitar player. They're written by the drummer or they're written by the bass player, you know, whatever, or the keyboardist, you know. So it's a waste of potential, in my opinion, you know, not to exploit that stuff. So now that you're giving the permission, especially you both are giving each other and the rest of the band, that's why on stage you guys are more like four droogs, you know, where you're you know, you've got mutual respect and everybody's a fan of each other. And that makes a big difference in your expression and your ability to create because you don't have anybody rolling their eyes going, oh, Christ, when's this over with? You know, it's that kind of thing. You know, so that's what's great about it. And that's why I think this album for you is probably as equally rewarding, if not more so, than the prior 10 years after stuff that enjoyed a lot of success in that day. But with this way, I think you're purging yourself a little bit more. You know, in your expressions.
That's a very good analysis of it. Yeah, you're right.
I just have to echo what Monte said. I hadn't heard the album up until a couple of days ago in preparation to do this. And what struck me was how much it sounds. I mean, it really sounds like what 10 years after would be doing in the 21st century. Wow. If it was the original lineup of the band. It's not one of these things where it's the name only and you go, who is this? Well, it's 10 years after. Doesn't sound anything like them. It really does, but the songs are just so good on this thing.
Oh, that's incredibly kind. I really appreciate that because we just tried to create the best product we could. And that was the nice thing with Marcus as well. I said, so... And because it's always the problem is the writing is what can break bands up. And I said, so what are we doing with this? Are the two main writers going to take sort of 60% and the rest of the band has 40% for their input? Or we're going to make it 80-20 or how, you know, of the writers' shares? How are we going to do this? And he said, no, hell with that. We're all going to be involved in it. We're all going to have something to do with it. He said, let's just split it 4 ways, which I thought was incredibly magnanimous. And it's worked a treat. You know, it really can.
Where does he come from? Where did you find him?
That was a difficult one because Colin was always going to be first choice. If in fact I'd called Colin several months before because Leo was ill and it looked like there were some gigs he wasn't going to be able to do, and I'd asked Colin if he could do it because we'd met on the road a lot and we knew what a lovely guy he was and what a great bass player, you know. So I called him and he said, "Oh yeah, I'll give it a go." He said Spencer's just wrapped the band up, so. He said, I was wondering what I was going to do next. He said, yeah, that's good. I'll give it a go. And we tried it out with another guitar player friend that Chick and I knew that we'd played with before and had been really good. But the guy just somehow, I think it was, his problem was he was following Joe Gooch. Now, Joe Gooch is a fantastic technical guitarist. He's not anywhere near in the same mold as Marcus. Marcus, his influence are basically the same as Alvin's were. In the early blues, those coming from the blues end. Joe Gooch came from post Hendrix, and was he is an amazing technical player. And I think the guy that we were working with to start with, because after the rehearsal, Colin said, I don't think this guy's going to cut it. I said, I know, I'm disappointed because he is really very good, but he's lost his confidence. And I think he was scared stiff of not being able to fit into the mold that Gooch had created with the technical stuff, you know. And I mean, we weren't looking for that. We would just want somebody who can express themselves, you know. Obviously, you've got to play the riffs of the songs, you know, because that's the key to the songs. And in fact, when Joe Gooch joined us, he said, what do you want me to do, Rick? Do you want me to copy Alvin? I said, no, God forbid. No, you've got to play. You've got to be yourself. I said, obviously, you've got to play the riff to Love Like a Man and Good Morning Little Schoolgirl and I'm Going Home. But I said the solos and everything else and how you take the songs and where you take them and how we jam them is down to you. Well, to the four of us, really, just working out together. But I said, no, I don't want you copying Alvin. Just play, be yourself, you know. So we'd got Colin on board, but it wasn't working with this other guy. And Chick phoned me after the rehearsal as well. He said, I'm really sorry, but this isn't working, is it? I said, no, it's not. He said, what are we going to do? I said, well, I'll keep looking. So I had a list as long as my arm, and I worked down a lot of very good players. And I got recommendations from other people. You know, there's a Blues Society in England. I rang them, and they gave me a list as well of people. And the brief was it had to be a young guy, good guitarist, good singer, basically, and could cover the 10 years after stuff. So I'm working down the list, and it's getting shorter and shorter. A lot of people were saying, oh, wow, I'm really flattered to be asked, but I'm doing my own thing at the moment. I've got a new album I'm just working on that's going to come out, and I may be going to America, la-di-da, you know. But, you know, if anything changes, I'll let you know straight away, because I would love the chance, you know. Thank you very much. So I'm talking to a PR guy about something totally different, and I said, you don't happen to know a good young blues singer guitarist, do you? I'm looking for somebody for 10 years after. And he said, actually, I don't know a guitarist. He said, but I do know a really good singer, and he's just been nominated for a blues award for this year. So this is 2013 I'm talking now. And he said, I said, what, do you know where I can reach him? He said, no, I don't. I said, well, who is it? He said, well, his name is Marcus Bonfanti. He said, well, that's all I know. He said, but have a look on the internet. You'll probably find he's got a website or whatever. Well, I looked on the internet, and he hadn't got a website. Anyway, eventually I found him through Facebook. And I sent him a message. I said, I don't know if you'd be interested, but I'm looking for a guitarist for 10 years after. Would you be interested? He said, oh, can I call you tomorrow? So I said, yeah. So he called me the next day. He said, yeah, I'm very interested. I'd like to have a go at it, yeah. By which time, actually, Marcus had set up, he got his website up and running. And I listened to that, and I thought, blimey, his voice is terrific. But it was, again, he was playing like acoustic guitar on a lot of stuff. I couldn't really tell if he could cut it as the electric guitar player we needed. So I went to see him at a show in Lichfield, which is not a million miles from where I live, a super little theatre, 400 seats. And he was the opening act for a band called The Straits, which is two guys from Dire Straits. The place was packed. Lights go down. He walks on the stage. He's tuning his acoustic guitar. And I've never seen or felt anything like it. That audience were in his hand from that minute. He hadn't said anything. He hadn't done anything. His stage presence was ridiculous. He got to the microphone. He said, good evening, my name's Marcus Bonfanti. You've probably never heard of me. I'm going to play you a few of my songs, and I really hope I'll see you after the show, you know. And that was it. He had a meeting out of his hand from that minute onwards. And he played at Storm, you know. But I still didn't know whether he could do electric guitar. So I go see him afterwards. I said, oh, it's a great show, fantastic, you know. He said, so what do you think? I said, well, I just need to know that you can cut it on the electric guitar. He said, well, yeah, sure I can. You know, it's on my website. I said, yeah, it's not really showing me what I need. I said, is there any chance that you could do me a demo of Love Like a Man and I'm Going Home? And he said, yeah, of course. Sure I will. So anyway, he said, I'll be in touch in the next few days. I said, right, fine. Because I knew he was on tour, so I wasn't expecting it to happen quickly. 2 days later, an email arrives with 2 songs in it. And I listened to him, and it was amazing. And he rang me up, and he said, what do you think? I said, I want to sign the whole band. And what he'd done was he got his drummer, who's a really good player and a lovely guy, and his brother plays bass. And he got those 2 guys, and they'd gone into the drummer's studio in London, and they put the tracks down, and it sounded phenomenal, you know. I'm thinking, I wish I could play drums like that. So then Chick calls me, and he says, what's happening? I said, I'm sending you an email. Have a listen, let me know. And he was back to me straight away. He said, sign him. So that was it. So we invited him to a rehearsal. And the funny thing about this, and I never realized it until we did an interview together somewhere, and he told the story. We had one rehearsal. I said, can we get another one? Because we've got some dates coming up soon that we'd really like. He said, yeah, sure. So we got together again. I said, and I phoned him before the second rehearsal. I said, oh, by the way, can you bring some clothes with you? Because we're going to do some photographs afterwards. So I said, yeah, okay, fine. So it wasn't until later, we're doing this interview together, about 2 or 3 months later. And he said, I never knew I was in the band. And the interviewer said to him, "Why was that?" He said, "Because Rick never told me." He said, "But I figured I was because he asked me to bring clothes to photographs." And I'd never realised, I never said to him, "You got the job," you know. Because when we had the second rehearsal, it just went so well, I just thought it was obvious, you know.
Yeah.
He still does his own thing. He does a lot of stuff on his own. He does a lot of sessions in London. And he has another band called Jawbone that he goes out on the road with and does all that. But it's very, very different. In fact, Jawbone's a terrific band, very, very different to what we do.
Well, it definitely sounds like you found a winner there with him. And I just wanted to reiterate how great I think the record is. And, you know, it just must feel so rewarding after all this time to kind of show the rest of the world what you guys can do as writers. As Marc said, you know, how rewarding that must be. So just big congratulations. I was floored when I put the record on. I was really not expecting it to be as great as it is.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
From right with Monte, too. Exactly.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're two jaded bastards too. I mean, we don't give praise lightly. We're very, very jaded. So it's from the heart.
Join the club. No, I'm kidding. Can I tell people where to get it? The official website is 10-years-after.co.uk. And if you go there, you can find a link to Deco Entertainment. That's DEKO Entertainment. And there's also a link there to Ric, RICLEETYA.com. That's RicLeeTYA.com, all one word, and no K with Rick. And that will take you to the place that you can get my book. And if you use that route to it, it is available on Amazon. But if you use that route, you can get a dedication, a personalized dedication. I'll sign the book and put in it whatever you want, which you won't get if you get it from Amazon. So if that's what you're looking for, it's what I'll be happy to do.
Could you put a $100 bill in there along with the dedication?
Who for?
Sorry about that.
Who for?
Me, of course.
No.
To pay for the book?
No, it means for me to pay him to buy it.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, promotion.
There's a good friend of ours. On Fridays here, we have what's called a Drummers Anonymous lunch. A very good friend of mine since 1974. I met him in Detroit, Michigan. Is the drummer with 10cc, Paul Burgess.
Oh, yeah.
And he lives just up the road here, about 3 miles away, which is not the reason I actually moved here, but I like the area. We used to meet in a cafe down the road for the Drummers Anonymous lunch. And he brought several other drummers along. There's Steve Gibson, who played with Chris Farlow a little bit, and some other bands locally. Very good drummer. And then there's a retired drummer and a guitar. There's a guitar player who's actually a very nice guy, so we've allowed him to join the Drummers Anonymous.
That's rare.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm telling you, we have something here in California that's very similar to that in the valley here, Westlake. And for some reason, for whatever reason, most of my musician friends they're drummers.
That's not a good thing to be saying, Mark. You want to be careful.
Oh, I know that, but I'm being completely honest that drummers, for some reason, they stick together like a community more than guitar players, more than lead singers, whatever. They look out for each other. They support each other. And, all the guys around here are not afraid of like recommending somebody if they can't make a gig, like they're going to take it. It's not like that. There's a real supportive community of drummers, and it's gratifying to know that there's one, that you're part of one there, because it really speaks a lot about their point of view. I mean, I'm sure not all of them are like that, I guess, but for some reason, the majority of people that I love to hang with are drummers. They just have this personality.
That's why we're good guys.
You are good guys.
Yeah.
It's without a doubt. I mean, I've seen it's a pattern. It really is a pattern. No pun intended. But I mean, it's really just it's great. So I'm glad that you've got that going on there. That's cool.
What I was going to explain to you was there's a guy called John Lingwood who started out with Manfred Mann and then played with Roger Chapman. I don't know if you're familiar. Roger Chapman was the singer with Family. And then John's now back with Manfred, and he and Paul and I have been friends for many, many years. And John lives down in Banbury, so he's not one of the locals. But I was hooked up with him again for some reason, and I said, well, why don't you come to the Drummers Anonymous virtual lunch? And he said, oh, that'd be brilliant. So he's been with us for several months now, and everybody else has got my book. but John hasn't. And we're swapping stories. I keep saying, "Oh, by the way, that's the book, John."
Yeah.
Everybody's rolling up laughing. So, have you got it yet, John? Yeah. So we have fun.
Hey, Rick, I do have one question for you here before we go.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what the difference between a lead guitarist and a terrorist is?
No, go on.
You can negotiate with a terrorist.
See why I only hang out with drummers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, sorry, I'm going to have to run now, but it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you all. And I hope we can do it again sometime,
Well, at some point, I'm gonna play "I'm Going Home with You" and Chick, because that got me into my first high school band, as I knew every damn lick and every note of that thing. And, I had an ES-335. My parents just got me, the whole 9 yards,
Yeah.
and I knew every single riff. That was my party trick in high school, was to play "I'm Going Home" note for note.
What you got to do, we're doing is a competition for guitarists to play with Chick, Colin, and me, and whoever we think's the best will get a prize.
Yeah. Well, you can skip all that shit and just let me do it, because I'm going to be the one that wins anyway. So I'll save
this was coming.
expense and time.
Yeah. I got to run, guys.
All right, man.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
This was great.
Yeah, see you again, I hope.
Okay.
Take care.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.